Canada, maple syrup and like Captain say, ay, kick your ass all hockey season, ay, now teach me riding horses, yeah, this is Canada.
You mentioned Canada. Most Americans don't even know the capital of Canada. Canada does not appear on their radar, doesn't figure in their thoughts. But you described it as probably, quote, probably the richest country in the world. I think that's objectively true. And yet Canada is not a rich country. In fact, it's getting poorer. Its life expectancy is declining. Its GDP is declining. And that's on purpose. The nation of Canada has been suppressed on purpose. Its population is being killed off by the state through its assisted suicide program, and its population is changing through mass immigration against the will of the population. So that country is being held down on purpose. And my question is, by whom and why?
Sure, that's a great question. And this is something that I struggle with all the time because I am a Canadian citizen. I went to school there. So my answer is that Canada was never really a nation state. It's more of a glorified resource colony for the British, the city of London. And the reality is now that the British are under a lot of strain, the city of London is under a lot of financial pressure. It sees places like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And what do you do if you have financial issues? Well, you do corporate restructuring, right? You change the middle management, right? And historically, the British got along very well with the Indian elite, right? They went into India and stole trillions of dollars from the Indians, and the Indian elite were perfectly happy to help them, right? So why not use the same model for Australia, for Canada? So, there are millions of Indians who immigrated to Canada in the past 5 years, and it's put a lot of strain on the Canadian economy because housing prices have exploded, and so ordinary Canadians can no longer afford to buy a house. And it's put tremendous pressure on the Canadian welfare system, on the Canadian economy. And you would think that the proper strategy would have a moratorium where they're like, you know what, we've had too many immigrants and we need to close the borders and absorb these immigrants because we want to ensure that these immigrants have proper housing, they have decent jobs, right? You would think that that'd be the right strategy.
Yes.
And instead, Mark Carney goes to India and says, we want more Indians. And also, we'll give you scholarships to come to Canada to study for free. Meanwhile, there are a lot of Canadians who are homeless, who are unemployed, and who cannot put food on the table. But hey, we want more Indians. So if it's not corporate restructuring, if it's not trying to asset strip Canada, I really don't understand the strategy for this.
There you guys have it. I've been saying it. It's been the theme. It's been the theme of my show is where is the Canadian sovereignty? It's disproving Canadian sovereignty. He said it. It's the city of London. We're a UK colony. We act like it because no sovereign nation would not develop its own infrastructure and build its own economic base using its God-given resources that we have. No nation would do that. Absolutely none. If they were sovereign. But today is Monday, March 23rd. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is the Canadian Sovereigntist. I have a great article for us today. And it's obviously tying into all of the world events and kind of how they're all hitting home, guys. Because 3 weeks ago, we know what happened. The U.S. attacked Iran. And since then, oil has jumped 50%, guys. Markets are pricing in 3 Bank of Canada rate hikes. And Canadian households are staring down higher mortgage rates, guys. Mortgage payments. We have the $1.78 gas. It's almost at $2 in a grocery bill that hasn't yet kind of taken effect because we'll see in the article they start talking about fertilizer and how that's all going to be playing out, guys. I mean, Canada is one of the largest oil producers in the world. We're number 4 in the entire world. We're above Saudi Arabia. We're above Russia, who we make fun of for being a gas tank economy, mind you. guys, and we're absorbing this shock like a country that has no oil. Guys, and let's get into it. One of U.S. President Donald Trump's stated goals in attacking Iran was to contain the nuclear threat posed by that country. 3 weeks later, with energy markets in turmoil, stocks erasing months of gains and higher prices, walloping consumers, economists are now assessing a different kind of threat, economic contagion posed by the conflict itself. Global oil prices jumped nearly 3% Friday at $112 USD as the International Energy Agency warned in a report that the disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which carries about 20% of the world's oil supply, has triggered the largest supply disruption in the history of global oil markets. After the war began on February 28th, oil prices soared roughly 50% and have gyrated wildly as traders digest often conflicting statements from the White House and Pentagon about plans to protect shipping lanes through the strait, U.S. troop deployments in the region, and measures aimed at boosting fuel supplies, guys. And we need to stop right here and kind of unpack this, because Canada is an oil producer taking a consumer hit from a war it had no hand in starting and it can't control, guys. That's the headline nobody's writing. Why are we taking this hit? Markets went from pricing, guys, 0 rate hikes before this war began to pricing 3 new ones in a single month. So bond yields are now, they literally just jumped from 2.7 to 3.2% in 3 weeks, guys, and that feeds directly into fixed rate mortgages. Desjardins, guys, is already warning that Toronto and Vancouver could be pushed further into recession, not because Canada ran out of oil. It's because Canada never built the infrastructure in the first place to insulate its own economy from a shock in a region it has no presence in. Guys, a producer nation with sovereign infrastructure does not absorb an oil shock this way, guys, but Canada does. Why? Why is this even happening? If we had pipelines to the West Coast and to the East Coast, we would be supplying ourselves. We would not, at least the Canadian domestic economy would not have to price oil this way if they didn't want to. We could export at whatever. Guys, this is what I'm talking about. This is that Canadian sovereignty that we need to be protecting, and we need the infrastructure. We have all of the natural resources to literally propel us to great heights. But let's keep going because it gets juicier. The confusion is on full display in bond markets. The oil price shock has led to a huge repricing of market expectations for monetary policy. As of Friday, financial markets are betting that the Bank of Canada will hike interest rates 3 times this year, starting in July, in response to higher inflation. 2 days earlier, markets expected only 1 rate increase, while prior to the war, the central bank was holding steady through 2026 or possibly even cutting rates. The shift in market expectations has a real impact on Canadians' bond yields, which underpin interest rates on fixed rate mortgages and other credit products, jumped this week even as central bankers around the world stood pat. The yield on a 5-year Government of Canada bond hit 3.2% on Friday, up from 2.7% at the start of the month. That's despite the fact that many strategists see a weak economic backdrop in Canada stemming from the trade war, slowing population growth and slumping job markets, guys. We need to unpack this because even this last sentence it's still hilarious how they compact all of this. Canada's problem is the trade war. 10% of the USMCA is under tariffs, but that's a trade war, guys. Slowing population growth. One of the major problems with Canada today is the fact that we grew our population too fast. But slowing population growth is a problem. And the whole slumping of the job markets is a cause of overpopulation. Economists are putting the typical household hit at about $1,000, guys. That is the floor. This isn't the ceiling, guys. Gas is up 27%. Diesel is up 35%, guys. And these costs feed directly into every good that moves by truck, guys. Our supply chains are taking a hit with this. And the fertilizer price spike from this conflict is going to hit the grocery stores eventually, guys, probably 6 to 9 months from now. And the full damage just hasn't arrived yet. And Canadian households have no sovereign buffer to absorb any of this because Canada never built one. We don't have the pipelines. We don't have the sovereign wealth fund to protect our nation, guys. Not like the way Norway did. They're sitting on a $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund that's now watching $112 oil, guys. Canada's watching it and it's thinking, oh my God, all our households are now being squeezed. While our producers are technically benefiting from it, but not really because we, again, don't have the pipelines to export our oil to markets that need it. Guys, the upside goes directly, exclusively to private companies and temporary federal tax receipts, guys. The downside goes to everybody else. Literally every Canadian is feeling the downside of this. And mind you, we had higher oil prices around in the 2012s, 2010s. It was much higher. We were seeing $150 a barrel of oil. But oil in Canada didn't hit almost $2. We were in that like $1.20 range, around that, and we were complaining then. Why is it at $112 that we're almost reaching a $2 a liter of oil, guys? It's ridiculous, guys. But let's keep it moving. The pain will fall more heavily on lower income households as well as families with children, said Mr. Toom in an interview. For those who spend more on fuel and food as a share of total spending, the consumer price hit will mean a much bigger drop in their disposable income, he said. And while it's already pricier to fill up at the pumps, the full impact has yet to hit, said Mr. Toom, since changes in production costs for farmers, like higher fuel and fertilizer prices, tend to show up in grocery stores 6 to 9 months later. For its part, the Bank of Canada isn't sounding the alarm about inflation yet. On Wednesday, after holding the central bank's benchmark rate steady at 2.25%, Governor Tiff Macklem said the bank is prepared to increase interest rates if the oil shock pushes up a broader set of goods and services prices and lifts inflation expectations. But he said that mild inflation heading into the conflict, headline inflation was 1.8% in February, and a weak economic backdrop means the risk of price pressures broadening out looks contained in the near term. We don't think this is going to spread quickly, so we've got some time, he said at the rate announcement. Guys, we need to unpack this as well, because again, everybody always thinks we have time. Time is the one thing that is consistently fleeting away from everybody's lives. Time is something we never have. And Tiff Macklem called it a mixed picture, guys, this week. What does that even mean? He says energy sector does better, consumers get squeezed. That framing deserves to be directly challenged in and of itself. It's contradictory. Guys, it is not mixed. Canada produces the oil and has no sovereign wealth fund to capture the windfall and passes the shock directly to households. The energy sector doing better means private companies and temporary federal tax receipts are doing better, not Canadian citizens. The squeeze is permanent until prices normalize. That's the problem. The upside evaporates immediately with them. And here's what nobody in Ottawa is actually talking about. Since February 28th, since the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market began, there has been no federal announcement about pipeline infrastructure. No call to revisit Energy East, for instance. They're not talking about it. No emergency review of export capacities, nothing, guys. There's nothing. Energy East did not die because Canada decided it was strategically unnecessary. It died because the regulatory environment made it uneconomical for a private company. That's literally the only reason. Ottawa never treated pipelines as a sovereignty question. This is exactly the moment that changes that calculation. $112 of oil, a conflict Canada can't influence, and households absorbing a shock Canada's own producers are profiting from. If not now, when does Canada actually decide that connecting this country with its own pipeline infrastructure is a national interest question and not a business case calculation? The silence since February 28th is the answer, guys. That's the answer. It doesn't make sense. You want political points? You want to capitalize on a bad situation? This is how you capitalize on a bad situation. Carney gets in front of the camera and he says, this should not be happening to Canada at all. This just shouldn't be happening to Canada. Why is this happening? Oh, it's happening because we don't have pipeline infrastructure. We don't have the pipeline infrastructure going west. We don't have the pipeline infrastructure going east. We're going to build it. We're going to fast track everything. We're going to get our engineers at a table. They're going to figure out how to build this thing as soon as possible so that in 10 years, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, by the time these pipelines are built coast to coast, Canada will be in a position that for every following subsequent generation, we will never have to absorb an oil shock this way, nor will we ever have to import our own oil. We will only use Canadian oil. This has not happened, and it's not going to happen. Why? Because Carney doesn't care. Because Canada, like the professor said, is a resource colony of the UK, of the City of London, and that's how we're always treated. And that is exactly why our politicians never do anything for the good of the sovereignty of the nation. Never. Absolutely never. Guys, and why does this all matter to Canadians? Canada is the 4th largest oil producer in the world, guys. And right now, Canadian households are paying $1.78 a liter, facing 3 potential rate hikes and waiting for grocery bills that haven't yet arrived, guys. The IEA called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, and Ottawa has not said a word about pipeline infrastructure since it started. The gap between what Canada has and what Canada has built with it is not an accident. This is systematic, it's purposeful. It is the result, guys, of decades of treating national infrastructure as a private investment question instead of a sovereignty question. The shock is here, the buffer was never built, and the conversation Ottawa should be having has still not happened. This is all I have for you guys today. Hope you guys liked today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please leave some comments in the comment section below. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.